Well, hello. Welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is the writer A.S. King. We can call her Amy, that she gave me permission to. Amy, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Hello, Paul. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here and I love talking about writing and I can do it all day, every day.
Well, good. That's exactly what we're going to do today. And Amy,
Awesome.
or A.S. King's book, is Pick the Lock. Her new, as you said, it's a more of a middle grade book.
No, no, this one's adults.
Th-
It crosses over. So it's
Okay.
adults and it's young adults and adults.
Young adults and adults. Okay, and I will read the bio that is in the back of the book here. A.S. King is the best-selling and award-winning author of many acclaimed books for young readers. Her novel Dig and the anthology The Collectors both won the Michael L. Prince Award, and her novel Ask the Passengers won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. The New York Times called her one of the best YA writers working today. In 2022, she was awarded the American Library Association's Margaret A. Edwards Award for her significant contribution to YA literature. King spends many months of the year traveling the country talking to teenagers about writing, mental health, and succotash. I'm questionable about that one. And she lives in Pennsylvania. Again, Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
My
Yeah, it's always people when I still can't believe I'm me. Like when people read that kind of stuff, I'm just still this person in my office. You know what I mean?
Sure, sure. Well, it's always weird to hear like your own intro, like, and if you, especially if you didn't write it yourself, it's
Oh
kind of
yeah.
like, is this what the publicist or the publisher's assistant, came up with? And you're like, that doesn't sound like me, or is it, I guess that's me.
Well, then you have the awkward ones where, you get to, because I do a lot of events, or
Hmm.
speaking events, and people will introduce me and they just read my whole bio from the website, which lists a lot of books. I'm like, I don't
Hmm.
need, they're just gonna, no, that's it's too. So I finally decided I would one day this winter I will write my own introduction and then give it to the person, and then not like because you just did great. That was actually a smart way to do it. Inside flap, perfect. Nice and succinct,
Well, I,
right?
well, I
Nice
looked.
and
I looked on your website, and the bio was like 3, 4 paragraphs
it's
long, and I
long.
thought that's a lot. So then I said, I'm
Yeah,
actually going to, take the the Cliff's Notes
smart.
version to do
Very
that
smart.
one. Okay, so as readers and I always do this, as listeners and viewers of the show are familiar, we like to start things off talking about things we may have read or watched lately. Did we like them? Did we hate them? Or we kind of like, nah, I don't ever need to see that one again. I'll go first just to give you some time to gather your thoughts. Did not well, I was not able to get to the movies, so I just watched a couple of things on TV. I know I've talked about this before. My wife turned me onto this. It is a British show called Taskmaster, and they have their own YouTube channel now, so you can watch that. And it is five. This is the UK version. It's just five British comedians, and each week goes on for 10 weeks at a time. Each week they are assigned a couple of these really weird tasks, and they're supposed to accomplish it. And I can't even try to describe it to do it justice. You have to watch it to get an idea of what it's like. Like one this past week, they had to disarm a quotes unquote bomb, and if they cut the wrong wire, like this, it would release this like plume of smoke in this like small enclosed space. But there were all these clues around the enclosed space, like which wires were the safe wires, and which was the danger wire. And they even like show hints along the way to for the viewer, and it's really amazing show. I think they're trying to develop an American version of it. So if you haven't seen Taskmaster, I think they also have a New Zealand one and maybe an Australian one, and I think they're trying to do other European countries, but definitely watch the UK one. And of course, I'm a big baker, so we watched the latest episode of the Great British Baking Show. I just love it, and it's just so like, oh my God, he's still. Oh, I hope his thing doesn't topple over at the last minute, that sort of thing. But that's what we've been watching in this house. Amy, what about around your house?
Well, okay, the first part is a little awkward because I haven't watched TV in about 30 years. So I don't have TV. But
Okay.
I did sign up for YouTube TV so that I could watch baseball, and then I didn't. And then I watched a little bit of Olympics, so it made like the $70 per month kind of worth it. And then I'm keeping it just during election cycle because I want to. But I do watch movies, and I haven't watched one in a while, but my plan is this is actually, I just came off tour. And I'm finally home. I did band mom stuff this weekend. I'm a marching band mom, and I decided that starting tomorrow, because I have to I run groups on Monday nights, but after tonight, starting tomorrow, I'm going to catch up on the Wes Anderson movies that I have not
Oh
seen.
wow.
So
Okay.
there are a few more recent ones that I haven't seen, and I'll probably knowing me, I'll probably watch Budapest Hotel again because I love that film so very much. But so that is what I'm going to do next week. But as for, I can tell you, I've been listening to a podcast. I've been listening to this podcast that's kind of local to me in a way, even though it's not. It's a national podcast, but there's just one of the people I know locally is on it. It's called the God Squad, and it came from John Fugelsang's um podcast. He kind of got these guys on to talk about um people call them Christian nationalists. I would call them white nationalists because I don't know. I have more respect, I suppose, for Christians. But anyway, there it's a really cool podcast because I'm not like a religious person. So it's kind of interesting because like they all talk about all this stuff in relation to the Bible, and I'm like, that's funny. But at the same time, it's also really interesting. Like it's helping me, I don't know, learn stuff. So that's groovy. And I didn't get into reading, but you didn't get to reading yet. So do we go back and forth, or do I get to tell you about the
Oh, oh,
audiobook I listened to?
my part is done. You can, if it's
Okay. All
something
right,
you read
cool.
that if you have comments on, please go ahead.
Because I was flying a lot, I was I tend to love comedy. I love stand-up comedy. Absolutely adore it. And um just on I was in the plane, and I guess my latest episode of whatever podcast stopped, and I was like, oh, I wonder what's on my audiobook list that's actually downloaded. And Leslie Jones's,
Oh,
I won't curse, but it's Leslie F. and Jones is the name of her memoir. And I started listening to it and I laughed for days. I mean, days. And when I come home, like when I came home, I was painting. I'm a painter as well. So I was painting, and it was great because I could just listen to a podcast or to an audiobook while I painted, which I hadn't really ever done before. And it was interesting. What was most interesting about it, and as someone who has read my own audiobooks before, meaning, as the performer, is that you could tell within about 10 minutes that Leslie Jones was not reading her book to you. Like she was not reading her book to you. She was just kind of maybe had it in front of her to kind of keep on track, but she was just telling you her story. And I actually wanted to look at how long the book was in total, because I will say it went a little long, but it
mhm.
was really worth it. But I mean, I think that if it was recorded straight from the book, it would have been a usual 8 to 9 hour thing. But this was really long, but it was really good. And it was 16 hours long.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah. And so it did, if it was 12, but it was really interesting and it was funny and it was great. And I really enjoyed it.
What
So
kind of things does she talk about? Is it like just kind of like about her and her story?
yeah, it's her memoir. So she starts kind of like where she grew up, how she, when they like little stories, like her dad was in the service, and then there was this one little story where they moved from Memphis, and kind of that kind of area where they were moving around a bit, like in the South, we'll say the Southeast, and then suddenly they were in L.A. They were in Compton, all of a sudden, and this would have been she is I think only a year or two younger than me, so this would have been 80s. Early 90s. She arrives in the 80s and she goes to school in Compton in a blue top and red shorts, or maybe
Oh
it was a
no.
red top and blue shorts. Of course, she doesn't know anything about the color codes of the
Right.
gangs or anything. And they laughed at her. They're like, "Where are you from? Because you are not from here." But the way she tells them are wonderful. And then, yeah, so she goes through her childhood and then she goes into really, I could really relate because she talked a lot about what it's really like to break into comedy and how long it takes. Talks about being a new jack. She kept going on about it, but she says it with this confidence of someone who's where she is now,
Hmm.
which is wonderful. But it also sounds like she was kind of always that kind of confident person that could just be like, sure, I'll try it. But she even talks about the times when she was afraid to. Um, but that was really interesting as a writer, as another entertainer, which is technically what we are. I had to fill out a financial aid form the other day for college for my son. And it asked, do you have a business? And I said, yes, because everything's Schedule C for me, right? So do you have a business? Yes. And then eventually it asks, and I was able to say what it does. And I'm going to go back, I'm going to rephrase that a little bit because I said, I write or books. So what is the product? And I was like, books. And then it says, if you sold the business today, how much would it be worth? And I was like, how much is my brain worth when it's not attached to my like spinal column? I'm like, zero. It's worth zero. And it's just amazing that I can have a business that's technically worth zero because I can't sell it to you, Paul. But anyway, similar, right? Because she's talking about writing jokes, being a writer. She was a writer on Saturday Night Live long before she was a cast member, which I think
Mm.
happens with a lot of cast members. But that was an interesting story. Just sort of listening to her go from the first time she did an open mic night all the way to leaving SNL and moving on from SNL and stuff like that. So that's yeah, it was interesting. And in her voice, and like I said, she wasn't reading one, like not one sentence does she say directly from the book. Because usually when you're recording an audiobook, they're like, you said a instead of and, you're gonna want to go back, start here, and then you start again and you try and get the same tone back. And she's just like freewheeling, man. She's just completely freewheeling. So yeah.
Uh,
Leslie effing Jones will say. But yeah, it was great.
okay. I'm always getting an offer. I think it's from Amazon or Audible saying, "Hey, you've got a credit for a free book," and I've never used it, so maybe I'll take advantage of that and actually, get that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. I
It
mean,
sounds like it'd be great.
it's pretty good.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Amy A.S. King, let's talk a little bit about you. So were you the type of writer who, you were always writing something as a kid, or you came into it a little later in life, or what is your story? How did you become the writer you are today?
Okay. Technically, there was a book that I stole from the library in 1982 called Confessions of a Teenage Baboon by Paul
Is
Zindel.
that the
Don't think
actual book right there?
this is literally the book. This is
Oh
the
my
book from
goodness.
the library. Yes, I've read it many times. It is held together with tape. I also stole all other Paul Zindel books from the same library. They know we've talked about it. Um,
No,
and
no grudges held.
I lecture on Zindel a lot, and I taught no grudges at all. But that was eighth grade, and I was standing in line for the lunch line. And I was standing there, and I had a legal tablet because I was that kind of eighth grader, and I wrote down on the legal tablet, I want to write books that help adults understand teenagers and help teenagers understand adults. And so what I did then was almost fail out of school. And so anytime I said something about this dream, I was told that I didn't have the grades really to do such things. And that's rubbish because I graduated in the bottom quarter of my class in 1988 and went on to get a degree in photography. Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't. I went to college first. It wasn't for me. It was in the middle of Pennsylvania, and they couldn't handle this at all. I had opinions, and I was a woman. It was very confusing for them, and so I moved to Philadelphia, went to art school, graduated with a degree in photography, and then was made completely obsolete within 2 years when digital came out, which was perfect because I moved to Ireland. My ex-husband, it was from Ireland, well, he still is from Ireland. Um, and I moved there and really it was how do I put this? It was an act of survival to to start writing. I had a cast on my arm, which is going to be the most passive sentence I ever say. Um, and I was writing letters back to my grandfather back home. I was very isolated, which definitely worked for people who wanted to control me and didn't work so much for me. Um, and so I couldn't write to my grandfather. So my sister-in-law loaned me a typewriter. And next thing you know, I started writing my first book. I was 24. I wrote 8 novels over 15 years and was finally published when I was 40 with novel number 7.
Mhm.
Never published number 8. There are 11 novels in the attic, and I don't ever want them published. If anyone publishes them, I will haunt them. Somebody recently asked, well, why don't you work on those and fix them? I'm like, no, 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 no. I'd rather be, and I look at my career too. I can see those novels and then the 8 middle ones, and I can see the 8 recent. I can look at it that way and go, oh, I would never want to go back. Like you grow, just like everything else. Like you
Mhm.
grow as an artist.
So
Um,
were those first eight or the before you got published, were
mhm.
those the ones you'll never let anyone see? Those were the ones you're kind of like feeling your way, kind of
Yeah.
getting the hang of this.
Absolutely. Just trying to figure out what writing was. I'd never taken a writing course. I still haven't, even though I teach grad school and teach writing. But yeah, they were just, the first one was just a classic first novel. Actually, I call it, like, honestly, I want to take it. There's a museum in Baltimore called the American Visionary Art Museum. It's my favorite museum to go to because it's specifically art that's created from trauma. And my books are created from trauma. My art is created from trauma. And so, and that's okay. I think a lot of ours are. I think a lot of people's are. And that first book, man, I had no money for paper. So I would just bum paper off people. And so I have, it's in everything from like ripped off A4 lined paper, like school paper, and then legal onion skin paper and all these, and then some of it was dot matrix even, and I just
Oh,
fed it
wow.
into the actual typewriter and kept writing. Single space, no margins, top, bottom, or side. You could tell I was just kind of, I don't want to say slowly losing my mind. I was keeping a good grip on it. Writing has allowed me to keep a grip on my mind while I should have been losing it because of just, the types of situations actually that pick the lock explorers really.
Okay, I want to ask you about writing influences, but you
Mhm.
mentioned like you got your start stealing Paul Zindel books from the library.
Yep.
What was it about his work that was so appealing that made you want to commit larceny?
Very, very simple. He was unflinchingly honest.
Hmm.
And you know what? There are two types of writers I tend to gravitate toward, right? One is this terribly, you can tell they're honest. You can tell, even though that's not about him, the
Hmm.
characters are written so authentically that there's no way that he isn't writing it about like he isn't writing it from his own place of trauma, actually. You can tell. And I've talked to people who knew Paul. I never got to meet him or even write him a letter, which is sad. I should have, because he changed and saved my life in many ways. But like he has a play. He won the Pulitzer. I don't know if you know this about Paul Sindel, but he won the Pulitzer in 70, oh, don't guess it, 70 something, with his play, The Effect of Gamma Rays on Man in the Moon Marigolds. And if you have not read that, I highly recommend it. It is a 2 hour read and for anybody, every age, because in the days where now narcissist or narcissism is in the zeitgeist at all times and people are talking about this constantly, Paul Sindel wrote one of the most incredible narcissistic mothers that you will ever read. And and it's just freeing. There's something awesome about it because he's so honest. So that's why. And then, of course, then very naturally gravitated toward Kurt Vonnegut the minute I could.
Hmm.
Um, and then I also loved weird, anything weird. So I fell in love with Salman Rushdie. Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses is the reason I moved from the reading chair, because when I first moved to Ireland, I wasn't allowed to work. So they told me I had to not work for 2 years unless I could prove that I could do a job that an Irish person couldn't, which just seemed rude because their unemployment issues are pretty big over there. So um, I just started to read like a book or two a day. And then I picked up the Satanic Verses, and it just was a matter of like I was broke, man. So it just happened to be like who was going to give me free books? And I had a friend give me her copy, hardcover, first edition of the Satanic Verses, and I read that. I'll never forget. It was such a big book. I had to close the back cover and went, I'm going to do this now. And by that time, the typewriter was already on my table, and I just moved to the next room and started that incredible, novel that way. But then I read a lot of men, and then I was talking to my English teacher from high school, and she said, "Why so many men?" And I was like, "I don't know, like that's just what I've got." And then she sent me a care package to Ireland, and she sent me, and they were all books from her classroom library because her name was written on the inside. And I read some Amy Tan. I read a lot of Margaret Atwood. I fell hard for Margaret Atwood. Again, more honesty, very honest about the culture, very honest. When you look at something like Handmaid's Tale, which I was going to say the other really, if you want to listen to a great audiobook, I don't know if you ever read The Handmaid's Tale, but I will tell you what, Claire Danes reads it. That's another audiobook that could be for your free credit.
Hmm.
Except I listened to that right before the 2020 election. Don't recommend the timing on that. Um, but yeah, so those are my influences. I mean, again, when I was younger, I really loved Tom Robbins. I've tried to read him since, and it's like, no, I think that's for 20s and 30s. Um, but I mean, honestly, if it's honest and real and just like I said, doesn't even flinch away from difficult topics, that's where I
Hmm.
am. That's where I stand.
Okay,
strongest.
that's great. I wanted to ask you that, a lot of the stuff you've written, it's YA, it's middle grade, young adult slash adult. Like, what was it that kind of drew you to writing for that kind of audience?
I think teenagers are a massive group of people who are underestimated and often bullied by the culture. So I think we were taught. I'm going to say we because I'm assuming that you're a similar generation to me, right?
Hmm.
So like we were taught what growing up was, and so were our parents, and so were our parents' parents, and so were our kids, and it seemed to always include leaving your child self or your teen self behind because it's an embarrassing, terrible place to be. Because what does the culture do to teenagers? It makes fun of how they dress, how they look, how they smell, what music they like, if they're in love, what clothes they're wearing, how they do their hair. Everything's just an eye roll. Everything's an eye roll. Like when you're 4 and you fall over. This is what I say to kids all the time in schools. Remember when you were 4 and you fell over, and everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, is your knee okay?" You add 10 years, you're 14, you trip over your big feet that you're not used to yet. You're on the floor. And your mom says, "Hurry up, we're late for the dentist." That's it. I said, nobody really, everything's a hassle with teenagers. When you're on Facebook or whatever, you're like, oh, my 9-year-old did this and I'm really freaked out. And someone's like, just wait till they're teenagers. Everyone talks about teenagers like they're monsters. And I can't stand it. Teenagers are awesome. And I'm tired of adults leaving their teenage selves behind and their child selves behind because it means that the trauma that they actually compounded when they were young is going to just screw up their lives actually until their 40s and 50s and things fall apart and they have to face all that stuff. Or not, but yeah.
Sure, sure.
Why
So,
teenagers? Because I love them.
okay, no,
I
that
love
makes
them
total sense.
unconditionally.
I get it. I get it. So, okay, so let's lead up to your book,
Oh,
Pick the Lock, which I've said middle grade. You said it's more YA slash
oh yeah,
adult.
definitely not middle
So,
grade.
so
Yeah.
for people unfamiliar with the book, like what is the log line, or like here's the 5 second pitch.
Oh, Amy King's books are so hard. This 5 second pitch. Let's read the inside of the flap. I'm going to use your trick. How about
If
that?
you want to.
Um, Jane Vandermaker Cook would like her mother back. Actually, I wrote that sentence. I was thrilled about that sentence. As Jane's mother tours the world to support the family, Jane lives and goes to school in a Victorian mansion with her younger brother and their mendacious father, who confines Jane's mother to a system of pneumatic tubes whenever she's at home. And then there's weirdly ever-present Aunt Finch, Milorad, the gardener, and his rat Brutus. For Jane, this all seems normal until she gains access to the files for a lifetime of security camera videos. Her lifetime. Pick the Lock is a punk opera, a primal scream, and a portrait of a family buried in lies. I think that's actually a really good description of the book. It is part punk opera. My structure is always a little. I mean, I follow the characters. They tell me what to do. So Jane
Hmm.
starts to write a punk opera one night, and I'm like, really? Are we really doing this? I don't know how to write an opera. So then I, read a few librettos and we went from there. But it really is about how the culture treats um, working mothers specifically, and especially if they're successful, especially if they're accomplished, and the types of put downs that mothers like that have to deal with. And actually just how, we're really taught as young women to dislike our mothers and to kind of have that, you know, head smashing. It's accepted and it's almost encouraged. And in actual fact, it's partly because we've been told, well, if your mother's working, she doesn't love you. Dude, women have been working forever, not since the 70s. I had someone the other day say, well, it's that women's lib stuff from the 70s. I'm like, dude, women have been working forever. Oh, well, of course, during the war. I'm like, that's the only time you thought women were working? Women have been working outside of the home for centuries. This myth, right, that we've not been is bonkers. But the lack of respect and more the bullying really of women who are accomplished and is well, I think it's kind of telling if you ask me. I think it's kind of telling that the culture doesn't like that. It's because it doesn't like women to step out of line and be different. So um but yeah, it's a book, and it's a book about Jane who's trying to
Hmm.
figure out all of it. She's 16 years old. She's trying to figure out like what is going on, like because she thinks that those tubes are only contained inside her house. She thinks that these tubes stay in the house and it's just her father controlling her mother when she's in the house. And she learns that maybe she's wrong about that, which
Yeah.
is part of the fun of the book.
Yeah, actually, we're not going to go into spoilers here. We try
No,
to
we
avoid
won't.
that. So I
Yeah,
have to ask, like, what was the inspiration for the story? I mean, did it start with just about Jane and her relationship with her mother, and the
right here.
father's relationship with the family?
It
Oh,
was
the
this.
Oh,
this it was
okay. So
this
for
it
those who are just listening, she's
yes
got a picture of, I guess you'd call it a
I've got
pneumatic tube system, and on a post-it note, it actually says system on it.
right. I wrote this, I drew this drawing on a post-it note. I'll tell you what the inspiration was, um, discovering that my children had been told lies for a long time. So I was being misrepresented. Me and I couldn't do anything about it because I didn't know about it. So if
Hmm.
you're out, if you're gone, if you're off making the money to feed the family, then you can't do anything about it. And so I was trying to figure out like what um, like I don't know, the metaphor came to me. I just drew a hamster tube with a chair in it, and I thought, ooh,
Hmm.
and then I started reading about pneumatic systems, and then I was like, oh, we're definitely going to be having women in tubes, and you can't do anything from in there. You can't, no one can hear you. So even if you were to try and correct the story, no one can really hear you in there. But honestly, the inspiration was that, and then you know, I kept trying to write the opening of the story, Paul, and honestly, it just first of all, it sounded very Jane Eyre. It sounded very, which might be why her name ended up Jane.
Mm.
But I was like, why was it so Victorian? It was so weird. And then one day I got furious about something that totally unrelated. I was just furious about a thing, right? And I don't usually like, I'm not an, I'm kind of like this mellow all the time. And so, but I got really angry about something somebody said. And I sat down and I wrote a bunch of terrible poems. And then I was like, oh, I could use this. Bam, opened a file, bam. And I wrote that prologue. And I was like, oh, here we are. This is the beginning of a book. Let's go. And I did. And that was it.
Okay, yeah. So I wanted to ask, like, it's a very unusual story, and there's a lot of twists and turns that I definitely did not see coming as the story progresses. But so I have to ask, like, when you sat down to start it, did you have an idea? Okay, here's what I want it to be, or did it just change like constantly as you were working along?
Yeah, no, I write by the seat of my pants. I use the surrealist method, except then I have a special method. I'm doing a dissertation on it now, but like I have a special way of writing, and I follow the character. So once that character starts skipping through the book, I just follow them, and they tell me what they're going to do. Um, and then another character might want a voice, like Brutus the Rat in this book. So Brutus the Rat shows up and starts talking. I'm like, all right, that's fair. Brutus the Rat should have because Brutus has way more history than a simple rat. So that's cool. And so I just sort of follow it. But what it does become a really big mess. Like writing for me is messy. I have this, I know people can't see it, but I'll explain it. But I have this way of organizing my chapters and especially like, I wrote a book once called Dig, and it had like 9 different points of view. So having to
Mm.
organize those and make sure that they're all weaving
They
together.
all overlap.
Yeah, and make sure there's enough of them. If you don't
Hmm.
hear from this one character for 100 pages, well, then you forget the character. So they really have to go together. But like this was for this book. This was for Pick the Lock. So I'm holding up it's basically a stapled together like 8 page table of
And
contents
lots
that's
of highlighter,
that's
different
color coded,
colors,
right?
and
So
yeah, it's
exactly. And then
very
this
much
is all
so.
dates. So this helps me like even in the beginning. Like I'm like, okay, man, I've done 100 pages. I don't even know if this fits. Like half the time it's winter, half the time it's summer. I don't know what day it is. I don't know, I don't know what holiday's coming. So then I have to stop. I have to go back. I have to comb through and I go, okay, cool. No, this started on September 22nd, which was weird actually. It starts on September 22nd, and I didn't know that was the day I was going to launch the book. I wrote that 3 years
Mm.
ago, and then on book launch, I had to say September 22nd, and that's when I realized it. I was like, no way. But anyway, and then so I can keep track of everything, and then eventually, like what I do is I'll write chapters and go, oh, this chapter doesn't go here at all. This chapter goes somewhere else, and I just shove it at the bottom, and
Hmm.
then eventually I have like 100 pages at the bottom, and then I have to read those, and I'm like, oh God, this is going to be a lot of junk, and then you're like, no, it's not. This one fits up here, kind of. This one fits there, and then you're scrolling, and then you find something like a song called Pick the Lock that you don't remember writing because it's an opera, right? So there's songs in
Hmm.
it, which is part of the humor. I like to be able to like mix my trauma with my humor because that's what it makes a good dramedy. And so, and then I found Pick the Lock, and I'm like, I don't really, and I mean, I don't remember writing it, but I don't like write drunk, edit sober, none of that stuff. I don't do anything drunk. So I'm like, huh. I don't know when I wrote this, but I guess that's the name of the book, and that's definitely the closing. That's the closing song. So that's what happens. I don't really remember. It's a weird fugue state. Honestly, it is automatism when it comes
Hmm.
to writing. And about 40 to 50,000 words end up on the cutting room floor too. So it's a long process. It's a bummer because you go in the wrong direction. So it's just like going through a maze. Sometimes you're like, ah, crap, dead end. All right, cut everything from here and then start back.
Yeah, yeah, I see. That is something I've talked about with a lot of writers before. Is that are you an outliner or a pantser? And the number of pantsers is much smaller. And my hats off to you because I just can't write that way. I have to outline it because my thing is screenplays and I have to
Uh-huh.
outline because
Oh,
it's
of
all about
course.
structure. And so
Yes.
I mean I know what the ending is before I know what the middle is because I know
Oh,
that's
right.
what I have to get towards. And that is actually something I wanted to ask you is that while you were working on it, did you at least have an idea of how it was going to end, or was it kind of like, I'm just going to let Jane figure things out and, see where that goes?
Oh, Paul, it was so frustrating. My best friend's named David, and he's a real plotter. He invented this. Here, I'll show you a picture. The sticky note plot kind of
Ah,
situation. Now that is my next book. Now,
okay.
honestly, I
That
had
okay.
one of those.
I just went for the people who are just listening. She just
Yeah,
kind of adjusted the camera to show, it's those slanted, the attic of your house type of thing, and it's one slant is just pretty much covered in post-it notes of different colors.
right. Yeah, and they're all like it's like act one, so it's very screenwriting, right? It's act one, 2A, turn 2B, and 3. And that's great. But I don't ever follow that. Like the original one of those, four pick the lock is over there somewhere for the archives. But like it has basic stuff in there. Like, can I curse on this? Can I curse on this
Yeah, that's
podcast?
fine. It's
Right.
not
So
for
like
kids anyway.
okay, cool. So like part three, I had put "Don't fuck with my mother" up there, and that actually ended up there on part. It ended up there on part. Is it four? I think it's four. Now I can't. I think so. Um, but like, so some stuff stays, but then some stuff doesn't, and I didn't know what was. I had no idea. Like, there's just sometimes it's so frustrating because I'm like, oh my gosh, what is it? And the answer's in the text. As I always say that, like, once you write 50 pages, 20 to 50 pages, all the answers for the rest of the book are in that text. You just have to, it's archaeology. It's a puzzle. We are both the puzzle makers and the puzzle solvers. That's what we are. That's what we do.
Okay, so I wanted to ask, that you're trying to figure things out, and does it kind of like, okay, did it get a little too overwhelming? Like, you're like trying to keep track of everything. And
Yeah.
is it kind of like, did you read things? I'm like, wait, I don't remember that. Or wait, is that something I thought of but never put down on paper? Was it like just difficult trying to keep track of anything? And kind of like the follow-up to that is, I mean, you must you must consider your editor as like a godsend. Just kind of like, or was it all you just kind of like going back and like, moving things back where they were supposed to be? Or was it kind of just like, I have my designated readers and they're going to give me the notes I need to like put things back in or put things into shape.
I love that you have all those things, Paul. I don't have any of those things. Okay. So I'm cheeky. And I sent my books to my editor and my agent on the same day, and no one has read them before then except me. That's how it
Mm.
works. Okay. And this one didn't need much editing at all. This was that moment I used to say to my old editor, and I used to say it to this one too. Like he'd say, okay, they'd say, oh, well, the letter's gonna come. I'm like, oh, you mean it wasn't perfect? I used to say it all the time. This is a joke. They'd be like, yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Like my old editor used to always apologize because that's what women are taught to do. But it was just, and this time it was sort of like there's really not much to do. And I'm like, oh, that's that I did work my butt off on it. But to go into the first question, to go backward, um, yeah, there were lost moments. There were times I was on the phone with my friends. There was a few friends. One time I called my friend Beth up here. She sat right here on the floor behind me in the office, and I basically pace, and I'm like, I finally bought the whiteboard that you can see behind me that I know listeners can't. There's just a
A
whiteboard,
big whiteboard.
a big ass whiteboard.
Hmm.
Which is funny. It doesn't really fit in this office, but it really helped because I could just sort
Sure.
of get my thoughts out and figure it out. But I tend to do it like I used to have very curly hair before menopause, and so it was super curly, very very curly. Now it's not. But to try and comb my hair was impossible, and that's a bit like how I work on a book. Like I start at the bottom, and so I start at the top, and I just keep combing and combing and combing, and eventually, you know how it goes. Like once you've revised it 100,000 million times, you remember. You can almost recite the first 100 pages, and then of course you have no idea what happens after that, and then it just keeps happening until you can somehow hold all through. Well, this is almost 400 pages, 400 pages in your mind, which is hard to understand, but I don't have faith in the middle of it. No, I freak right out. I freak right out and I call my friends. I'm like, get up here, help me. And then I just basically talk nonstop until I can figure out at least one step forward. And then I do. And then I just try and follow my nose, really.
Okay, that's great stuff.
Yeah.
The one of the things I really wanted to ask you about was the characters.
Yeah.
Now, because like with screenwriting, it's often said like pretty much every character from your protagonist to like someone who's got like one line of dialogue or someone who doesn't even do anything, that each character is in some way a reflection of the writer. So I
Mhm.
have to ask, like how much of you is in Jane, but they're also, there's Vernon, the dad, who is just a terrible, terrible person.
Yes, he
And
is.
so I wanted to ask, like, how much of the characters are reflections in some capacity of you, but also I really want to get into more about Vernon, like, how you came up with that character and how you developed it and just kept him just being so heinous.
He was kind of easy to write for me because he's a everything's metaphorical. So we're going to start there. I
Okay.
mean, I'm known as a surrealist, and I like that. I like that label. I think it's okay. Again, this one isn't a straight surrealist book. I've written straight up surrealist books. My I guess the novel before this one called Switch. That's a straight up surrealist book.
Hmm.
This one has a little bit more just sort of that weirdness, right? Because who has a pneumatic tube system that's human sized in their house, right? But so basically, every character is sort of filtered through this metaphorical, unflinching honesty. So it's weird because you're being honest about the effect that certain types of behaviors have on human beings, and you know that because you've lived through them. Okay, but then what you do is you kind of juggle, you kind of throw it all in there so that nobody is the person that you know, right? Nobody is actually you're not writing about anyone you know, right? Um, and so uh Vernon was easy because I've known more than one Vernon in my life. And I I suppose the one I knew the most, you know, I was still one of those believers. People, because this book is about domestic violence. It's something we haven't actually talked about. We haven't said that word. And so when we talk about domestic violence in the regular company, most people just shrug and are like, I don't know why she doesn't leave that guy. And it's like it's so much more complicated than that, right?
Hmm.
First of all, there's the control that's going on, right? People don't seem to understand that. And people think domestic violence means it's a punch in the face and you're like, get out. It just doesn't
Right.
work that way. It's a lot more emotional, a lot more psychological than that. And so I think that Vernon represents sort of that. Vernon represents the patriarchy. Vernon
Hmm.
represents, so on a whole, he's got that larger thing. He represents the patriarchy and the control, but he also represents real life people who walk around every day who act like this. And I've met plenty of people like that. As for like me, yeah, of course. Like, I mean, they would be Jane's a little bit like me, but I would say Mina's a little bit like me. I'd say Henry's a little bit like me. I was the youngest as well.
Hmm.
And the attention always went on the older kids. And Marta is a cook. I love Marta. Millerad is me, the gardener. I was a self-sufficient farmer in Ireland for 10 years, man. That is Millerad is like the bomb. Um, so I guess yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, every character is, I've always said that. People don't understand that. They're like, hold up, what about that really nasty guy? Is he part you? I'm like, he's not maybe part me, but like if I thought him up in my head, I
But
guess he is.
you have influences that at least help create the character. It's not
Absolutely.
necessarily, this is a reflection of me. This is a reflection of like one of my experiences or
Right. Or
something that I'm familiar with.
absolutely things I read about too. Like that was a big one. I read a lot about parental alienation in an intact marriage, which is also called counterparenting. And when I read about counterparenting, like in an intact family, I learned that what I had experienced wasn't something that, I felt less alone because it still blows my mind because you always find out last, which is one of the reasons, and that's where Jane's whole finding the movies thing. So that does connect to me, finding out everything last, and that idea of like, oh, I'm always the last to know, right? Because when everybody's purposely keeping secret from you, you are the last to know.
Hmm.
And so yeah, so most of it just comes out of either experience, research, that kind of stuff. But yeah, you're right. It comes from me.
Yeah, I also wanted to ask you about Henry because I thought
Yeah.
it was a great supporting character
Oh, he's wonderful.
that it was really interesting to see how his arc developed. And especially again, I talked about twists and turns, like, things were happening as revealed as we got closer to, I guess, the middle and then more towards the second half. just totally out of left field, but also totally believable that they weren't
Yeah.
like, oh, that that doesn't make any sense. But then as you read it and the story progresses, it's like, oh my gosh, that makes total sense. And then there's
Mhm.
like a little reveal about the backstory and the history of that character. So
Yeah.
was that something that kind of developed as you were working it out? You just kind of like, okay, she's got a younger brother. What can happen to him? Or you just kind of like, I'm just going to see what he says or see what he tells me.
I just followed the story, man. And then one day, and I don't mind sharing this, this isn't a spoiler. The heading Henry Shocking Bender came to me, and I thought, that's weird. Henry's so young. Because at
Hmm.
first Henry was a lot younger, actually. He was like probably 12 or something when he's
Yeah.
really 40. So he was way younger.
Hmm.
And I thought that's a weird thing to come out of me. And so I have a note file when I write. I should say this. I have a note file that's sometimes almost as many words as the book. And a lot of times they're repetitive. It's the most annoying thing to read. I'm like, oh my God, I said that 3 pages ago. But it's stuff I have to remember and stuff I'm working out. So this is my little friend, right? So I'm basically working it out with myself on paper. But with Henry, yeah, I mean, he showed up magically. I'm going to put it that way, meaning everything that unfolds, I didn't have to try.
Hmm.
And every time, like my fingers would write like these things that are a little bit shocking, like about I'll just say 'cause without the spoiler, like the fact that he knew, we'll put it that way, right? The fact
Hmm.
that he knew, like I was like, oh, okay, and that makes sense because he did this, this, and this. Oh my gosh, it all fits together. So it's weird because I think when you're being authentic, when you're being unflinchingly honest about humanity and humans and characters, people and life, um, for me anyway, stuff just comes out and it's just there. It's there. And I go, okay, make sure you polish this up and tone this down. And
Hmm.
then in revision, and revision's everything for me, because and that's unlike that. That's the thing. I said the surrealist method, except for that part, because the surrealists refuse to revise. And I've been reading for the dissertation, I've been reading a lot of original surrealism. This stuff is totally unsellable. Like you could not sell that in a fit. Whereas now we have to, the revision is everything. But yeah, with Henry, I got lucky with him. I didn't have to squeeze, I didn't have to like maneuver anything to fit him in or fit his actions in. It just naturally unfolded. And I think that, considering he really is a picture of neglect and yet favoritism.
Hmm.
Oh, right. But it's go back to the patriarchy. And if you look at the larger structure, okay, these are people and characters and whatever. But if Vernon is the patriarchy, well, Henry is a man or a young man who is affected by the patriarchy. And the patriarchy affects men almost as much as well, absolutely as much as it affects women. It limits men in ways that they're frustrated about when they get into their 30s, 50s, 40s, and they're very angry and frustrated about it. It's like, yeah, but you got some perks from that, right? And it's just a bummer because I wish we could just crush it, just smash it, but we can't. So in a way, it also acts as that overarching sort of metaphor that Henry lives the life he does. But yeah, he just kind of was magical.
Yeah,
The
I
heart.
wanted to ask because you had mentioned like, he came almost fully formed. And so it sounds like there wasn't a lot of, readjusting or editing or tweaking or anything to like go back and modify things to like better suit him later on in the story.
No, those first 50 to 100 pages were almost like once I got them solid, then I worked on the next 100 and he was already set up. It was nice. Jane, I had to go back and do a few things too. I had to like the suitors. There's a bunch of suitors in the book where
Hmm.
Jane is seeing these suitors and her father arranges the suitors and you eventually find out where that comes from and what kind of system that is. But like I had to go back and fix those, right? Because those
Hmm.
first four were like one, two, three, and four. I'm like, no, they can't be. They have to be 25 or whatever they are, 24. And so, once I understood the system, once the system revealed itself to me, then I had to go back into the book and go, okay, let's make sure the system's like flowing through this book the way it should be. And so, yeah, the usual revision stuff.
Okay. And so I'm sorry. So the book just came out recently, like about a month
Yeah,
ago.
yeah, not even. Yeah, it was the 24th of September. Yeah.
Okay. So how have the reactions been to it so far?
Oh, they've been fantastic. I just got another starred review last week, so it has starred reviews on it. And it's really hard these days to get reviewed at all. It's since the pandemic, things have changed a bit. So I was really thrilled because I have I think 6 reviews on it now, which is lovely. They've all been fantastic. I don't look online. I don't do
Hmm.
that.
Not
I
yeah,
just
you
stay.
don't go after the comments. I totally
No,
understand it.
no,
I
I
was going to say, so have you heard from any readers like in that target age demographic? Kind of like, I can relate to this, or this sounds exactly
oh
like it would
yes.
happen to me, or my best friend, that sort of thing.
Yes, I actually just got two. I got two, one last night and one this morning. And it was funny because the one young person came at me through art. They made some
Hmm.
art, and that was specific to the book. And then I was like, "Oh man, that's great, man. Do you mind if I put it up on whatever?" And they said, "Oh, that's cool." And we had this conversation back and forth, and then they dropped it. Oh yeah, no, I can totally relate to Henry in this. Even though I'm
Oh.
a girl and I'm 16, she was 16. She's like, I know Jane's, I'm supposed to relate to Jane, but I relate to Henry in this. And then I had another person, well, that was this morning. Last night's was different, but it was same deal. It was like, whoa, you just wrote my life out, and I'm like, I'm so sorry.
Mm.
I have been in spots of that story, and I'm so sorry. Nobody in that story deserved the life they got. Even Vernon didn't deserve the life he got. He didn't deserve the high living he got to live. He certainly didn't earn that.
Sure, sure. So one of the things I'd like to kind of wrap things up with is to ask the guest, like, so what advice do you have for writers? I mean, it doesn't have to be anything, nothing monumental or life-changing.
Yeah.
Like I was looking on your website and you said like, read books, and just write, and don't be afraid of writing.
Yeah, I mean, write a lot. That's the big one. And then honestly, when I talk to young people, or not even young people, when people ask me what's my advice like, I would say write and read a lot and widely. But then the other one is volunteer. And people don't, that's usually a weird one, but I'm a lifelong volunteer.
Hmm.
And, yeah, it takes time. But it's funny. I was actually away on a band thing this weekend, which I don't usually do, got an idea for a book from it. And in fact, every volunteer job I've ever had gives me ideas for books because it takes me somewhere new. And you're always working with people you would have never met if you weren't volunteering. So one of my biggest volunteer jobs brought me to literacy teaching. I taught adults how to read in Ireland and beyond, and wrote curricula and things like this for adult learners. And I learned so much, but I also got to go so many places, like including like went to Jamaica to visit, just because they were going to throw away a bunch of workbooks, and I'm Pennsylvania Dutch, I'm cheap, and I can't throw away things that are I have to reuse them, and so I took them to Jamaica because it's UK English, etc. So the biggest thing for me is honestly get out there, travel, live in another country. Don't just travel there and see the tourist sites. Go places but do the tourist sites too, but like, I don't know, get out there, travel, see new things. And that doesn't mean you have to go to Europe. If you can't afford to go to the town nearby, go to a city, go to a gallery, go walk the gallery street. Um, Things that you wouldn't usually do. And that's where volunteering always brings me there. Because somehow I ended up, because I'm running a pool. I was running a pool at some point, and we to raise money, we we would take over a stand at the local hockey arena. But then this whole book came out of that because I'm holding up Reality Boy. Reality Boy is serving chicken fingers and fries and tapping beers at the hockey center. And it's funny because what did I say? I said it was raising money for the pool. Well, this book is all about some woman who swims 150 laps a day and thinks she's a squid. I'm showing both everybody sees the ants and the squid
And the
tattoo
squid
on
tattoo
my
on your
arm
arm.
because that was me doing laps every day, which is why when I got older, my triceps sure did get flabby. But hey, I'm still fit. I can still swim. So this is the thing. So the more you volunteer, and obviously it has the added bonus of the fact that you're giving back to your community. But really, there are selfish reasons to get out and volunteer. It pushes you out of your comfort zone,
Hmm.
and you learn new things. And no matter what age you are. I just started a nonprofit. I'm learning all kinds of stuff. Like
Yeah.
it's my own dumb nonprofit. I'm like, oh, what did I do that for? But
Th-
anyway, yeah,
That's
that's
fantastic. Oh, so okay, I was going to ask you. You got some ideas from your band trip this weekend. So what is next for you? I mean, do you have several in development, or you have one like, okay, here's my big one, but I've got like these four on the side.
Well, I've got a few things. This next year is going to be interesting. I'm shifting a little bit, because it takes me a while to write one of those books. Like Pick the Lock took me 3.5 years. And
Hmm.
so, and I'm wrung out at the moment. So what I tend to do, I write middle grade books kind of in between. And so the one I just showed you that's up on the wall, that's a middle grade book, about toxic waste and Friendship, which is a prequel to another book about plastic pollution and friendship. And then I have three middle grade books in my head right now. So I might concentrate on stuff for younger readers for the next year or two. I'm also a painter, so I'm kind of trying to finish a body of work to maybe show and well, I don't know when I'm 60. But like in a while. But yeah, I'm working on that book next. I'm starting in January. But from now until the end of the year, it's painting and finishing the dissertation and just the research and really reading. Not so much the writing part of it, but just reading and making sure I can prove what I said I could prove, which I must
Sure.
be able to because they accepted it. So, there we are. But yeah.
That is fantastic. Amy King, where can people find find out more about you and your work?
You can find me at as-king.com. That's my writing website. You can find me on Instagram as well. The links are on my website. And then I also have this nonprofit called Gracie's House, which is their mission is safe spaces for LGBTQ kids in rural areas. And if you hear this and you're like, "Ooh, that's a cool thing," look up Gracie's House. You'll find it on both again, you'll find it on the internet. You'll find it on Instagram and Facebook. And if you know anybody who would be like interested in coming to a camp in rural Pennsylvania, we're starting our first safe space camp for kids in July of 2025. So you can find me in all those places.
All right, that is fantastic. Oh, so the website is
Yep,
as-king.com, and her book, once again, is Pick the Lock, available, I'm guessing, at your website and on Amazon.
everywhere. Yeah, I shop indie usually, but yeah, if you have an indie bookseller, shop
Sure.
indie.
Or just buy it
Um,
directly from the author. That's always a good way to go as well.
yeah, signed copies come from my indie
Oh,
too.
there
So
you
if
go.
you want a signed
Even better.
copy, yeah, you'll find that link on my website. Thank
That
you.
is fantastic. Okay.
Yeah,
Again, Amy King, thank you for being here today.
thank you, Paul.
Audience, if you enjoyed today's show, please hit like and subscribe. You can leave a comment, tell your friends. You can check out my screenwriting blog, Maximum Z. That's at maximumz.blog. I'm also on Twitter at maximum_Z. And this show itself has its own Twitter account at podcast CWL. Also on Instagram at Pez Screenwriting. And you can check out my Go Ahead and Ask books about screenwriting and pie. Those are on Amazon. Like I said, that's Amy. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.